So my name is Sandra Garcia, and I am here, I like to say, playing a dual role. I am a program manager for the New York Urban League. I manage the Equity Innovation Lab, and I'm also a proud coach with C-Suite Coach. And it is great when our worlds come together and allow us to work in collaboration and do meaningful, impactful work together. So I'm really excited for today's conversation. I want to make sure that I also acknowledge that we have another New York Urban League program present, CCNSF. And if you are here as a participant of the program, thank you for being here. Welcome. And we are excited for you to gain as much as I'm excited to gain out of the conversation. This year for our series with C-Suite Coach, we have introduced various different tracks. And today's track is part of the People Manager track. And so I'm excited to myself walk away with insight on giving feedback that drives results as well. And we have two guest speakers, which Angelina Darasaw is going to introduce. But first, let's create space for Angelina Darasaw, who is the founder and CEO of C-Suite Coach. Angelina, tell us more about you, your business, and then also the conversation we're about to have.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to the New York Urban League for continuing to host this space. I'm really excited to be here with you all today because this is a topic that is near and dear to me. As Sandy mentioned, I'm Angelina Darasaw, and I'm the founder and CEO of C-Suite Coach. We are approaching a decade of doing business with some of the world's largest companies in July. And we offer organizational development consulting services, which include building onboarding programs, people manager programs, and many other resources to support talent within large organizations, including executive coaches. I see several of our executive coaches on the line today. But I want to dive in and get into what we're here to talk about, which is something that I know a lot of talent are hungry for in organizations, but sometimes managers struggle with effective ways to get this done. And that is, how do we give feedback that drives results? For you who are on the line trying to think about how to have this conversation with your manager, how do we get them to give the feedback that can help get us to that next space? We have the right people with us to talk about that today. So I want to go ahead and introduce who we have in the room. We have Tanneasha Gordon, who is a multifaceted cyber leader with over 19 years of experience advising large global organizations on privacy, content compliance, product compliance, data governance, and data protection. As a trusted advisor to her clients, she's usually in the trenches with senior leaders advising on complex compliance transformations that involve redefining governance models, re-architecting products and platforms, revamping policies, revising controls, and redesigning operating models. Tanneasha is a forward-thinking technologist who keeps a pulse on emerging trends and technologies to help organizations anticipate and navigate disruptions, threats, and opportunities to their business models and product roadmaps. She is the go-to leader in times of crises and change, directing companies and interpreting requirements, assessing readiness, pivoting product strategies, and implementing best-in-class solutions. And a quote from her that I love is, "I live in downtown Oakland, although I rather live on. I have an adopted daughter who now has a 1-year-old, which technically makes me a grandma. I am obsessed with group chats and text messaging and hate unplanned phone calls. I play chess almost every day, love sci-fi, and believe I'm pretty funny." I think you're funny too, Tanneasha, so this is great. And we also have with us Carrie Bloxson, and also Carrie Durbin, as you can see here, who is Hatchet Book Group's Chief People Officer and is responsible for leading and amplifying talent development, recruitment, retention, training, office culture, business processes, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and more. At both Hatchet Book Group and Hatchet UK, Bloxson oversees one of Hatchet's touchstone business pillars, changing the story, proactively strengthening the company's mission to make it easy for everyone to discover new worlds of ideas, learning, entertainment, and opportunity. As a member of each company's executive management board, Bloxson is a steadfast advocate for creating more diverse, inclusive, and equitable workspaces, which has led to industry-wide recognition and awards. In April 2024, Bloxson was promoted to Senior Vice President of Culture and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, supporting both US and UK offices of Hatchet. Prior to this, she was Hatchet's inaugural Chief Diversity Officer, leading all culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategies, initiatives, and programs. Her vision and its implementation resulted in the company becoming an industry leader by increasing diverse representation at all career levels. Thank you both for being here today.
No, thank you for having us. This is exciting.
Awesome. So in the chat, as we get started and dive in, go ahead and let us know, what are your challenges, issues, questions, and concerns when it comes to effective feedback? And let's dive in and hear from our speakers today. It's often said that feedback is a gift. This is something I say all the time myself, but sometimes it might feel more like a burden. From your perspective, and as you think about the mindset managers should have, how can leaders shift their own perception of giving feedback to see it as an opportunity for growth, both for themselves and their team members? And Carrie, I'd love to start with you.
I just wanted to say, Angelina, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you and to the National Urban League, and to Tanneasha. I'm very grateful to be joining you in this conversation, and to all of the attendees for tuning in. So to answer your question about feedback being a gift and being a burden, and that sometimes that fine line, I like to say that feedback should be a gift, but only if it's given well and constructively. Otherwise, I see feedback as a burden that's wrapped in good intentions, but isn't going to really lead to much. And so I feel that the way that we can kind of start to think about that is recognizing that feedback isn't about judgment. It should really be about developing and growing the person that you are offering that feedback to. It's a chance to help that person see their potential more clearly. It's a chance to remove guesswork. It's a chance to build trust through honesty, both ways. But in a lot of workplaces, especially the way that traditional businesses have run, feedback tends to be treated sort of like a correction tool rather than a growth tool. It's more reactive and formal, and it seems to be very much tied to like performance reviews or moments in crisis. It's like, oh, that performance review is coming up. I better get ready to, hear that feedback from my boss. Let me brace myself. Or, some stuff goes down in the office and there's that crisis moment, and then everyone's sort of bracing for like, who's going to get, that negative feedback. And what happens is when you have a workplace like that, that creates fear, and it reinforces hierarchy and power dynamics. And it makes the feedback feel like something was done to you rather than done for you in a growth, in a growth mindset. So really, to normalize feedback, I think we need to stop treating it like a performance management tool and start treating it like a daily practice, not something that we save up for reviews. And the more that you can weave that feedback into like the everyday rhythm of how we work together, you will start to see, I think, a lot of reciprocity in terms of how your teams and the leadership team start to work together a bit more cohesively.
No, plus one to that, I love how you brought up the comment around, it being centered around growth. I do think feedback is often misunderstood as critique, when in reality is a catalyst for growth, right? And I think a lot of organizations myopically think that the growth is for the recipient, when the growth is also for the provider, the feedback provider. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, strong leadership is marked by consistent, persistent growth, whether that's business growth, whether that is impact growth, whether that's personal growth. And in this instance, what we're talking about today is around talent growth. And to me, if you don't know how to groom, grow, and cultivate talent, are you demonstrating strong leadership? So I think if leaders reframe feedback as a developmental tool rather than what you were saying, Carrie, in terms of like just this judgment, this critique, this thing that is burdensome, I think I think those leaders will also see that it's a mirror for progress and a mirror for growth. And, you know, the techniques that I try to deploy to kind of not create that culture that you're talking about, that you were alluding to, is even when I'm giving feedback, I also personalize it, right? Because first of all, if you are having a development area or an issue that I have not seen or I have not been through, that means that it's really abnormal. And if it's abnormal, we're having a different conversation. We're having an exit conversation. So 9 times out of 10, we are all going to have, if you're a leader that have been through the trenches, you're going to have had development areas yourself. So being able to call on some of those instances where you have gotten a similar feedback or had similar struggles or had some similar development area, you not only demonstrate vulnerability and empathy with the recipient, but you're able to create that a better culture of feedback, showing that, wait, this is par for course. When I'm developing and growing in an organization, I'm going to, this, my leader went through this, so I'm going through this. This is just part of developing and growing. So I think that's something, a mindset that leaders can also adopt, where it's a growth mindset, like what you talked about, Carrie, but also put more of yourself into the conversation and be more vulnerable and open.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I love that quote, feedback is a catalyst for growth. That really is a way we can all be thinking about it. You all are both global leaders leading at the highest levels in your organization, but take a step back and try to put yourself in those early manager days, because Carrie, you said something that I thought was really important. Feedback needs to be integrated into that everyday rhythm. When you're just getting started as a people manager, and you have to manage your own goals and KPIs with also trying to help the members of your team hit their metrics as well, it can feel really overwhelming to carve out time to weave it into the everyday rhythm. How do you encourage the people managers to start building that practice and make time essentially to build that into the rhythm of everyday work?
Okay, sure. Yeah. And listen, this is not easy stuff. Okay. Feedback, you know, I did a lot of coaching before I took over the chief people officer role, and I would have office hours and people could come in and ask me sort of any off the record question. And the number one question that people wanted support on is, how can I deliver feedback, or it's scary, or I'm not sure I want to do this, or the employee is not going to receive it. So this is across the board. This is not easy stuff. And what I often say is that think about offering feedback as a practice, just like any other type of skill. And like with so many skills that require a little bit of uncomfortableness to do it, that's growth. And most people don't embrace the idea of giving feedback without a little bit of uncomfortableness. It's uncomfortable for many of us, but you can kind of name it as such and do it anyway. There's no one who's like, I love giving feedback. Like most of the time, that is not the case. So everyone is generally speaking on the same page with, I'm not sure I want to get into this and really get familiar with it. But the more that you do, the easier that it becomes and the more familiar it gets. I really love what Tanneasha said earlier about personalizing it and using it as a way to perhaps give insight or examples, as we leaders had to kind of go through our own trial and error. And if there's a way to kind of normalize that and personalize it, I think that's great. Some other things that I offer are, you can start by trying to keep feedback pretty lightweight and regular. You can build in quick debriefs after projects and meetings. You can embed it into real-time conversations. You can just give really light touches. You can say, you know what, that landed really well. One thing you might want to try next time is X, Y, and Z. So you can think about how do you kind of iterate based on that. The other thing I like to do is, for my direct reports, or what I advise managers to do, is to build into your one-on-one agendas a standing agenda item that just says checking in. And that's your opportunity not only to ask for feedback from the person that you're meeting with, but also for yourself to offer feedback to that person. It doesn't have to be informal, but it's just a way to help reframe things. That feedback has to be about confrontation. Really what it is, it's about getting clarity, and getting that person that you're speaking with set up for success and improvement and growth. And I think the other thing I would mention is that you can give feedback and be direct and kind at the same time. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative, even if you're doing a course correction. What you're doing is you are acting as a coach, and you're really trying to get that person set up for success. And if you're grounded in the same goals and shared purpose as that person, and they understand that, it doesn't have to feel like a burden on either end.
No, I take a more extremist view. Like, I think if you're not giving feedback, you're doing a disservice to the organization. Point blank. I don't care if waterworks, crying, listen, you name it, I've dealt with it, right? Like, to me, if you're not giving feedback, you're doing a disservice to that talent and to the entire organization. Like, people spend money to get these degrees. People go through rigorous interview processes. They cannot join an organization and not be growing and developing because a leader or a manager is afraid to give feedback. Like, that's unacceptable. And that's how I run my teams. But I also make sure it's very clear up front. So back to what you were saying too, Carrie, where you're like, feedback is an opportunity for clarity, but is a clarity around what? And it's a clarity around expectations. So something that I've done in the past, and actually some of my partners used to do, they would just write down like Dummy's Guide for Working with Me, right? Like, I'm very clear about my things around what I expect. Like, I expect deliverables and artifacts to be high quality output. I expect that you collaborate. I expect that you're giving feedback. So I get very clear around what my expectations are. I'll write them out. I'll say them verbally. And then something that I see with other orgs, because as a consultant, I have the benefit of not just seeing my organization, but other companies. What's not clear is what is expected at that role, year 1, year 2, year 3, then getting to the next level, year 1, year 2, year 3. It's always these like, yeah, when you're a manager, you're this, when you're a supervisor, you're this, or no, it needs to, every single year needs to be clear. But that is never really like that architecture or the profile is never built out that well. Yes, you may have the JD when they apply for the job, but what does that mean when they're 2 years in, right? So getting clear on the role, right, expectations at the exact point they are in their career, and what their leader's expectation of them is, and then how that goes back to the organizational goal or OKR or the company's business directive, it becomes much more clear why I'm being so crazy with you about this feedback, like why I'm drilling in, like this needs to be quality, because you see how it maps back and that you're an important part of the bottom line. Now, if I'm not having that feedback conversation with you, that means I don't see growth potential in you. That means that you might not have a career here, or you're not going to work with me again. And that's kind of just like how I'm very clear as a leader. And they're top 3 things that I want to see: quality, I want to see intentionality, I want to see preparedness, and like those are the things that I coalesce around, and I make it very clear so that when you're missing the mark, you can't say I didn't tell you, but I'm also going to help you. Like, I'm not like going to throw you out in the wolves. It's like, I think what leaders need to also do is like, if you have that feedback, get clear about your expectations up front. And even maybe use the technique feed forward versus feedback, right? When you're a new manager and you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, set those expectations and provide feed forward. Well, when you're operating this process, or when you're building out this, when you're conducting meetings and workshops, this is what I expect, versus letting them run wild and come back and be like, oh, that wasn't ran well. This is why it wasn't ran well. Start doing feed forward and set your expectations. And then they can start like pulsing themselves, knowing like, okay, I missed the mark here. And you don't even have to give feedback then, right?
Yeah. Can I jump in with a point? Because you just raised a really good point, which is another very specific thing that I like to do related to the feed forward piece, is when I have a new employee who's starting on my team, the first thing that they get on their first day is a welcome letter from me that explains how I want to see their next 30, 60, 90 days set up. And included in that it talks about the types of feedback that I offer and what I do. Like, so setting those expectations. Welcome to HBG. Well, like we call it HBG, not Hachette here. Welcome to HBG. So glad to have you here. I just wanted to set your expectations for the next 36, because that's the point of which you're most unsure and you're just not sure who people are or how they're going to show up. So that's why I say, here's what you can do to hit your first 30 days. I expect you to like meet all of the people that you can meet, understand the documentation, 60 days, I want to see this. 90 days here, we will meet on these days, and here are the things that I'm expecting from you. And then I kind of go into those things. I mean, I don't talk about preparedness, although that would be a good one to add in there, I have to say. But that way, from the jump, that person kind of understands how I plan to communicate, what I expect from them, and I kind of eliminate all of the guessing. And then those guardrails are set, and then we kind of go from there. And I haven't heard from my directs this way, but I think that it's a nice way to kind of establish what those expectations are from day one, because I feel like, again, that's where that point of uncertainty is probably the strongest.
Absolutely. And Angelina is going to kill me because I'm reading the comments and the messages here. I think the questions are actually really good. I think I like the one that said, well, I like all of them, but one that I'm reading right now is, when thinking about hybrid work and remote settings where informal coaching moments are limited, how can managers avoid protective hesitation and ensure underrepresented employees receive the direct feedback they need to grow? And so,
before you start, let me jump in there, because
please.
That also relates to a piece Carrie said about having the debriefs as a part of the day-to-day conversation. If I'm not comfortable with you, or if I don't have a relationship with you because differences between us make it harder for me to connect, then frequently I'm not bringing you in those debriefs and giving you that regular feedback conversation. So if you could speak to that and how managers can do a better job at that.
So I definitely understand. So I have an unconventional approach, and then I have a conventional approach. So especially when dealing with unrepresented employees and, like, you know, weaving it into the day-to-day rhythm, Angelina, when I have underrepresented, and I've had employees that come to me that's like, you know, because I work in a male-dominated industry, like this male partner is not helping me, or this person is not giving me the right feedback. And when I go and actually do the due diligence, they're giving the feedback, but it's wrapped in so much protective bubble that the female cannot actually receive it. And it's because, and when I go and I give the direct, because I'm super direct, I'm from New York, this is just how I roll, and I'm Jamaican. And I give the direct feedback, these females will actually start crying, right? But what I do is I leave room for you to cry, and I'm going to still give you the direct feedback. You need to let out those emotions. Like, crying is not like a bad thing. If you have emotions, you need to release it, right? And I think what happens, you know, is that sometimes male leaders may be even more hesitant, right, to give that tough feedback to a female because they don't know how to manage that emotional response. So for me, it's then coaching those male leaders, like, get over it, learn how to sit in discomfort if someone is crying. And it is for me to coach the recipient, the feedback recipient, like, don't take everything personal, but if you are feeling emotions, let that out. I mean, I've been in all the waterworks, right? And like, they're so used to the direct feedback now. And I've seen it turn around where they can now manage their emotions, but sometimes the shock of it all, they will react in a certain way. So I say that to say, sometimes getting the feedback from someone that looks like you might be helpful, right? Like, because I'm a woman, and granted it was a white female, she could hear me better, but I also knew she needed to hear it straight. So that's helpful. So another analogous situation that I had recently was more of a Gen Z. Like, I was getting feedback that, you know, she wasn't performing the way that she needed to perform. I know if I go and talk to her, I'm too senior, it's going to be a heavy, thick, stressful conversation. So I went to another Gen Z who's her peer mentor, who's a couple years older than her, that's been mentoring her because she's came in as an intern, to to coach her and mentor her, right? So sometimes you can use, that's my unconventional method, where you may want to use someone that's in that, say, that has some shared cultural experience, shared demographic related experience that could help actually give the harsh feedback the way that it needs to be given. And then the conventional approach that I would have in terms of baking things into the rhythm of feedback, in addition to what Carrie was saying, is, maybe do role playing, leveraging feedback frameworks like situation, behavior, impact, which I know you all are very aware of, where you make it so agnostic that, like, okay, this behavior, this was the situation, this was the behavior, this was the impact. And the reason why this is an important thing for us to discuss is because it impacts our bottom line. Or you are making people feel left out when you don't include them into meetings, and that's not the culture we want to perpetuate. Or the client is not paying for that, right? We cannot do that, right? So making sure that it ties back into something larger than the person, I think, is very important, so that they don't take it personal. But those are some like unconventional and conventional approaches I've used to, just answering Monique's question, but also weaving in, like, how do you get it into the rhythm of your day? Like leveraging people that can provide feedback that someone can hear from is also a powerful tool.
We certainly use SBI, situation, behavior, impact, in many of our trainings when we're working with people managers, and agree that that certainly helps keep it very specific, because one of the things that we see often is the clarity is missing from a lot of managers and how they give feedback. So getting that is important. Just going down that train of thought as we're talking about the clarity, sometimes in those debriefs, it's easy to give feedback after the specific situation that happened and behaviors you noticed. But when you observe that there are some leadership skills or critical skills that your team members or your direct reports need to develop that are not tied to specific situations, how do you give the feedback on the skills that they need to keep honing and working on? How does that conversation occur?
And I also want to just pick up on something that you were saying earlier, Tanneasha, which is, so from a people officer HR perspective, the theme that I see most consistently related to feedback is when a manager wants to terminate an employee or create some sort of disciplinary action, but that manager hasn't done the work of giving that person enough feedback that's clear or, very importantly, documented. And then also hasn't given that employee a real chance to course correct. And when I see that as a failure of the manager, not just of the employee's performance. And then what happens is now you have an employee who thinks they're doing just fine because we haven't done the service of giving that person feedback. So the training piece and how you train your managers to deliver feedback in the right way could not be more important. I mean, it's just such a critical training, and something I'm going to be looking at doing more of here at Hachette. If there's any Hachette employees online and listening, I think it's just so important. So the three things that I kind of either notice or try to train around is one, which is the thing I mentioned at the very beginning, that the feedback is just too infrequent or it's too overly formalized. We can't just rely on the annual reviews as the main feedback touch point. It's just too slow for today's pace of work, especially for younger employees who kind of thrive on real-time coaching. A lot of Gen Z folks kind of are used to having feedback in real time, and it would do us a better service to kind of meet people where they're at. So that's where we start to normalize debriefs after projects or meetings so that feedback becomes more of a routine rather than this disruption. It just becomes normalized in that way. Second, which is also, Tanneasha, something you mentioned, the feedback is just too vague. So you hear things like, be more strategic, or I don't know, I just think you need to show more leadership, but you're not giving concrete examples or guidance. And that kind of feedback doesn't help people grow. It just kind of leaves them a little bit guessing in terms of what to do. So that's where we can teach managers simple frameworks like the situation, behavior, impact, or the compliment sandwich. And we can also then help them practice in dialogue. It takes skill. But again, it's a muscle that becomes stronger with use. And then the third thing is creating the culture and creating a culture around feedback where I'm a big believer in psychological safety. That's, my philosophy, and how the more psychologically safe the environment is, the more likely that feedback is going to be heard rather than kind of looked at from a place of defensiveness. So with the training, I think there needs to be training on emotional intelligence, on active listening, and how to receive feedback as a manager, not just to give it. So at the end of the day, again, that feedback is less about the performance management annual review tool and more about how are we as a company, manager and employee, looking at how to have communication that's about building trust and clarity rather than that fear place. So it's those three things. I have more to say on it, but let me just stop talking right now because I'm really curious to see what Tanneasha's going to say.
No, a +1 to what you had to say.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you touched on the psychological safety bit, because that is really crucial for getting that effective feedback and developing that relationship with the direct reports. Two things that you both mentioned that you do is setting that expectation up front with those who you'll be managing, right? So Carrie, I hear you send a letter to your employees when they're just getting started in that onboarding process, so they know the expectation. Tanneasha, it sounds like you also set the expectation that feedback is, as you called it, a catalyst for growth and a demonstration of your investment in them. Apart from that, what are some other practical steps that leaders can be taking to really cultivate that environment where feedback is seen as a safe space and that psychological safety can be created?
Couple things come to mind with that. One being, taking a step back. Before we even start talking about feedback, like what kind of culture are you wanting to establish in your organization? Do you want to have a growth mindset, right? There's literally a whole book on growth mindset and limiting mindset. So even if you wanted to establish that culture, reading a book together around how the mindset that we need to have, right? How do you drive higher emotional intelligence, right? You can do, team building exercises that measure, one, your business chemistry, like how you operate within an organization. Deloitte does that. You can find it online. There's a little self tool that you can take and figure that out. But also like maybe measuring your emotional intelligence. And then the manager can have a conversation of why that's important to the culture that we have. And then it's around like, how do you build emotional resilience, right? And I'm saying all of these things because emotional intelligence, emotional resilience, growth mindset, all of this is inner work that people have to do. And if you have a therapist and if you're doing that personal development work, it's a little bit easier getting tough feedback. But if you aren't, you need, as a manager, if your people aren't getting, have a therapist and doing that personal development work, you have to put these kind of structures and cultural things in place so that they are safe, right? Because you're more psychologically safe if you know how the types of armors and how to protect yourself and what is an actual trigger and what's not a trigger, right? And you're working this out in your personal time. You can't do that at work. So managers can create that space by creating a culture that is more attuned and understand that. And I have noticed that when you have professionals that have higher EQ or higher levels of introspection and self-awareness, they are able to consume and take feedback with a little bit more ease. Like I like one of my managers, senior managers coming to mind. I tell you, like, I can be unfiltered with him. I'm like, you messed up here. Like, this is what happened. This is what it did. This is what they're thinking. I know you for 12 years. So I know that that's not what you probably were thinking. Like, let me on. He's like, that's a good point. But that person wasn't thinking this way. This is what I'm going to do differently. He doesn't take anything to heart anymore because he does so much inner work that like he knows that feedback is just, especially when I'm giving it, like I hired him, I help him, trying to get him promoted. I got him promoted this far. He knows that when I'm telling him something, it's literally to continue to sculpt his leadership profile, to make sure that when he's seen and he's interacting with juniors, senior people, clients, that he is accepted, that he is received well. So, but again, I noticed that because I know that he's doing the work and I know that he's introspective, right? And I had to take a hard look at myself too, like, why don't I take feedback harsh, right? And it's because I honestly, over the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, I have not received feedback that I didn't know was my area of development. Some of it is intentional, like, Tanneasha, you're too direct. I love it though. It works for me, but that's a feedback I will get, right? So like, I haven't received feedback in the last decade that I wasn't aware, like, that is an issue or that is a behavior that may not be received well in certain settings or something I need to work on. And I think we need to encourage teams and people to be introspective. Like, let's be realistic, right? And if you are, when you receive the feedback, you're just going to be like, that's a reminder. Let me continue to sharpen this thing or work on this thing.
A lot to say on psychological safety. This is my favorite topic. So hopefully, you got a rising applause there. I agree. So I feel like the term psychological safety gets thrown around a lot in workplaces, and I'll have employees who might say, well, I don't feel safe, or I don't feel safe talking to this person, or what have you. Psychological safety is not always about agreeing in the workplace, and it's not even necessarily about comfort in the workplace. Psychological safety is knowing that you can take an interpersonal risk and speak up, or offer an idea, or share a concern, or offer feedback, or admit a mistake without being retaliated against or punished or humiliated for doing so. It's basically showing up and doing your job, and sometimes being direct, but doing it constructively and moving on, and not have to worry about those sort of repercussions. And I think that sometimes there's this misconception that when people say they don't feel safe, it's like, well, I don't feel comfortable. It's like, well, a lot of us don't feel comfortable. But you still have to perform within the responsibilities of your role. And so long as the conversation is respectful and constructive and fair, then that checks the boxes of psychological safety. It doesn't mean agreement, and sometimes it can be uncomfortable. So that's one thing. But the other thing I was going to add about creating this culture where you can be psychologically safe, or help to perpetuate an environment. One other thing that I really like workplaces to do, or where I think workplaces are successful, is by looking at feedback surveys, so pulse surveys, getting a temperature check, and that's data. So one, you're asking people to take a survey, usually they're anonymized, and that right there gives you a baseline of how people are feeling. Then managers can take that data and further it to say, hey, I'm in charge of the marketing team, and I saw that we were really low on the scores around, I feel like everybody pulls equal weight in the company. I'm making it up. Let's talk about that. But now you've got a bridge and data of which to speak to that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise get surfaced in your one-on-ones. So that's the only other thing I wanted to add, but I thought what Tanneasha said was really smart.
Plus one to your points there. Take some of that with me.
Yeah, I feel we're all walking away with new definitions to bring to these conversations. So I appreciate you both. I'm seeing in the chat, cheers for the feed forward, Tanneasha, and also that you're spot on, especially as it comes to creating a safe space. Now, you both touched on the idea of Gen Zs needing more feedback, which we know that in a multi-generational workplace that there are different expectations regarding feedback frequency and style. Any advice you have for those who are managing multi-generational teams on what they should be keeping in mind to tailor their feedback delivery across age groups?
I think, we know that Gen Zs thrive on immediacy, like everything is fast, they love Wikipedia as well. So it's around immediacy and iterative, while Gen X may need more structured, less maybe frequent formal performance reviews. They may need more one-on-one time, right? They may need the information to be much more crisp. So I think that's necessitating leaders to be more adaptive. And, I think thinking about what does that mean in terms of how you create the environment, that psychological safety culture, emotional intelligent culture. I think with the younger generation, figuring out how you do some of that micro feedback, like Carrie, you were talking about earlier, like little dosage, like how you can like iteratively provide that to your younger employees. And then for your more seasoned staff, thinking about, periodic one-on-ones where you are very clear about what you're asking them to do and how it impacts a larger organization. I know Gen X is like very specific about that. And, if that seems too daunting, if all else fails, like just go to each of if you have a small team, go to each person and ask them how they prefer to receive feedback. Like, do they want it iteratively? Do they want it annually? Do they, want to get expectations up front and do pulse checks? Like figuring that out together is going to, make sure there's no veil of ignorance in the mix, and any confusion will be, dismissed.
I don't think I have. I suppose the only other I had that also asking, how would you like to receive feedback can go a long way, because you're giving people agency in how they choose to communicate. And as a leader, if it doesn't matter to you either way, you're already not on the back foot by giving that feedback. So I couldn't agree with you more about asking people what works for them. I think there could be something to be said about balancing the immediacy of feedback with folks like Gen Z with a little bit of reflection, which I think, Tanneasha, you mentioned earlier. It's like, well, here's some feedback. By the way, I can tell you, when I was in your shoes, blah, 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 years ago, I ran into this situation. And I think sometimes those thoughtful moments can be really helpful. It helps build in a little bit of dimension of just, I don't know, authenticity into the situation. It doesn't feel as transactional. And this is the other thing that I do and that I recommend to managers. Go take your one-to-ones out for coffee. Go do once a month, once every 6 weeks. Go do a walk around the block, coffee walk and talk. Go do a lunch if you can. But if you can get out of the office and out of just the general environment and have like a deeper conversation where you're really kind of pushing on some of these issues, and you do it in a way that's, again, about motivation and evolving. I'm a big fan of not here's what you did wrong, but here are some things that I think you could be doing to make yourself even more successful, stronger, putting you on a path to growth. It's almost like that appreciative inquiry thing where you're doing, you're giving feedback to motivate. I think that can also go a long way as well.
I love that.
That's awesome. And I cannot agree more with the idea of giving everyone on the team agency, if you can, for your direct reports. So often the generations get grouped in together and everyone has their own unique needs. So it's really important for managers to recognize that more and more. Please keep putting your questions in the chat. I think we got to many of them. And I see one more for you all to share, book titles and other resources that have been helpful for you. I have one more question for each of you, and then I will take another look at the chat and see if any of you have more questions for our speakers. So the first one for you, Tanneasha, I'd love to understand and hear more your expertise and strategy. When you first started, you were chatting us about aligning to organizational goals, aligning feedback to the OKRs, and also making sure that there are synergies between that and individual development plans. Can you talk a bit more about that, and especially for those teams that are figuring it out and navigating a lot of change? We're seeing a lot of that with our clients right now as they're adapting, whether it's AI entering the workforce or if they're dealing with just shifts because of the administration. They're dealing with a lot of change, and sometimes the OKRs they started out with aren't the ones that still exist. So how then do managers make sure that there's alignment with those changing OKRs and individual development plans?
So I think that's a really powerful and timely question, especially where things are today. I think if your OKRs are changing, it's getting back to what is mission critical for my agency, what is business critical for my company, like what are shareholders expecting? you got to get back to first principles, because your OKRs should always be mapping back up to their like layers down from that. But if your OKRs are shifting, you don't understand, there are market level signals, and then getting back to like, what is the purpose of your organization? And if the purpose of your organization is to connect people, or is it to serve, you know, healthcare workers, or whatever the case may be, then thinking about, wait, do I sit in the finance? Do I sit in the HR department? Where do I sit? How do I be accretive to that? What is my CEO thinking? And this is what, you know, your business leader or your group leader should be thinking about. Like, what is keeping them up at night? How do I protect my team from any layoffs? How do I protect the viability, or make sure that my team is seen as strategic or on strategy? Like, if you're on strategy, you will 9 times out of 10 like be out of any conversation around rifts, right? If you are able to sense rifts are coming, why are you hiring new people? Right? Like keep those PIDs and see, are we able to do more with less? And then that becomes like a goal for the organization. Can we demonstrate that we have more output with the people that we have today versus hiring more people, because we know that like there's some market constraints economically, or there may be budget cuts, or there may be introduction of AI. Train your team on AI. If you know you're hearing rumblings like, what are we going to do with AI? Get some free courses online. Do it together as a cohort, as a team. Like, we're all going to get smart on this thing, and let's do our own internal hackathon to see how we can come up with the next best idea. So if things are shifting in your organization that you feel like is out of your control, going back to first principles, what is my CEO or my agency leader thinking? What is the market saying? What are our competitors doing? How do I distill that so that I can literally make my organization like recession and rift proof? And you come up with your own interim OKRs then, and then you figure that out as a team. And then that can build a certain level of culture. Like, they feel like, oh, wait, we're trying to protect our entire org together, versus them sitting like, my manager doesn't know what's going on. I don't know how I'm supposed to perform. Like, that level of anxiety doesn't allow for anyone to perform at their best and fullest potential. So like, solving that together can create a whole new culture, and people might come up with amazing ideas and be able to make the manager or the boss or the director look good, right? Because you're taking a ground up approach. So those are the things that's what I would recommend for folks that are in like this vortex of change. And for those that already have OKRs, like, how do you distill that to what your folks are working on? Your OKRs should be measurable, and all your projects should route back up to that, and break up your body of work based off of like who you feel have the best opportunity to grow in that position, in that body of work, but also to develop others, and to make sure that the OKRs, you know, come to fruition. And maybe when you give them that assignment, be very clear, like, this project is directly associated with this OKR. Your performance means it's going to impact the entire organization's performance. Let me know how I can best support you. These are my expectations. Tell me what you expect of me as your manager, because we are in this together. Because if you fail, I'm going to fail, right? Like, so having those real dialogue where they feel like they're in this together and they understand where we're going, that could really drive a lot of empowerment and a lot of trust.
Thank you so much, Tanneasha. Very powerful, because this is something that a lot of managers are actively struggling with, right? How do we navigate change and still make sure that we're having those direct lines of feedback with our team? We have a question in the chat, and then I'll get to my last question for you, Carrie, but I want to make sure we address the audience question, which is, do you think that feedback moments should be reciprocal in nature, meaning leaders should not only provide feedback, but also be vulnerable enough to open themselves up to receive that feedback? I'm seeing a head nod. Talk about what is the cadence for that you're opening up the conversation. So it's not every time I share some developmental feedback with you, now it's, and here's what you need to do, you know? How does that conversation, what is the flow of that reciprocal feedback?
I can go really quickly. My firm has a formal process for this. So we have post upward 360 feedback where the most junior person is anonymous. We have those channels, and senior people will get dinged if they don't have enough. Like, you need to have at least 3 to 4 people anonymously give you feedback. So you're encouraged to reach out to everyone, right? So that's like a structural organizational method that my firm has proactively put in place. And they do a really good job with that. And then when I am having my one-on-ones with everyone, I'm always asking, like, how can I help you? Like, what do I need to, support you with? And I'm not very hierarchical. So many of the folks that have worked with me for years would be like, well, Tanneasha, you're just too detailed. I'm like, yeah, you're right, I am, but I'm going to accept it because we're getting paid to be detailed, right? You know what I mean? So I always, try to ask, like, any feedback from me, or how can I help you? And I am always tasked. Like, my junior managers will always tell me, well, I need you to do this for me. I need more resources. I need a budget for this. I need you to be more available and come take out more people. Like, they actually ask for way too much.
Well, we don't have the 360s here, but I do like having, well, the pulse surveys are helpful because we do have some manager questions in there, and then we can kind of cut by department and division. But I think that one place where you can kind of look at a democratic exchange of feedback is in your one-to-ones, because I like to think of it as a session where that's an employee who needs my time for something specific, so much just like I would, need their time to check in on things. But that's an opportunity every week for your employee to check in with you and ask. And there's I always have that standing agenda item as a prompting question. And I think oftentimes, especially when it's a new team member, they're like, no, everything's fine. But then when you can start to get into discussion, then things can, it starts to get a bit easier, and you can start to build it into a conversation. You can frame it as less direct depending on the employee. I have some employees who are a few levels lower than me and would just be absolutely terrified to say anything, and to say anything to me, and I fully recognize that. But we can talk about things in terms of scenarios. Well, that project that happened the other day, do you have any suggestions on what you think might, could be improved? So it's less taking the scariness, if you will, out of someone that is very junior to you asking you for that feedback, and more kind of placing it into whatever the action or the initiative is, and trying to kind of work through it that way. But it is an exercise in emotional intelligence, and it kind of depends on the person that you're working with and what would make sense for you as a manager to kind of solicit it in a way where you feel like that's going to be authentic and helpful. And it does take a little bit. It does. Sometimes this is more of a strategic kind of build up rather than a here's what it's going to be. But that's what managers are. We're here for that.
And we're getting to time. We do want to hear your thoughts and your comments. So please do fill out the brief survey we put in the chat. And I also see our team dropped in an article that we recently wrote on the topic of protective hesitation, which came up. I want to close with just two last questions. And thank you so much, both of you, for everything you shared. I feel you all are the dream managers I wish I had was in corporate, when I'm hearing the way you're looking at your relationship with your direct reports. The question I have for you, Carrie, is there is a lot of mistrust and a huge gap in trust for a lot of managers and employees. For those who are on the call that are in transition, what are some of the things that they can be looking out for in interviews to identify if this is going to be a manager who will really be invested in their development? And then following that, Tanneasha, if you could just share some of the resources or books that you've read that have helped you develop your approach.
That is a great question. So if you are a candidate and you're really trying to dig into the culture or how somebody really is before you take that leap and get that job offer and accept that offer, there's a couple of different kind of like forensic level things you can do. One, I'm a big proponent of asking your HR person or the person who's coordinating your interviews if you might be able to speak with someone in an employee resource group, especially if you're a traditionally underrepresented candidate. first of all, if they don't have employee resource groups, that's probably a flag right there. So do you have employee resource groups? Is there a DEI advisory board? Get a sense of how culture is driven, and if they're willing to let you talk to employees. That's one. Are they willing to let you talk to colleagues on the same team that you will be on that have the same manager? Now, that's not to say you have to ask that colleague, so how's that manager? But you'll be able to hopefully infer through context clues how that person shows up. Well, how do reviews happen? How do you receive feedback? Are you able to offer feedback? There's lots of ways you can kind of ask around it. And if this is a company that's really interested in getting you on board, of which they should be, there shouldn't be any reason why they wouldn't want to bring other people, your colleagues and peers and like-minded thought leaders, into the conversation so that you can get as much information as possible. And I also believe that they might be quite pleased for you to ask those questions, because what you're doing is you're demonstrating curiosity and interest in the business. So I see that as kind of a win-win. And I think that's probably a better way of going in, other than looking at Glassdoor, which tends to kind of go on either end of the extreme. You want to talk to the employees in that company, and they should be able to set that up for you.
That's plus one to that. I love those points you made, Carrie. In terms of the books, I would recommend, like, a lot of leadership books that I would more so zero in on would be like Good to Great, Leaders Eat Last, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Those are some of the grounding leadership books. And then it is literally, my firm has so many leadership development training. Like, we have an entire facility called Deloitte University. And
Yes,
I mean, it's next level. Like, they teach you how to give virtual feedback virtually, role play, feedback in person, how to grow teams, how to develop teams, how to have hard conversations with clients, because sometimes you need to give them some feedback, which could be stressful, right? So we have our own internal curriculum. Unfortunately, it's not available, but we also do make available something we call business chemistry. We crafted this. It's kind of like Myers-Briggs, but for corporate America and teams and organizational behavior. And it basically allows you to understand the profile of your coworker or your teams and how they receive information, what their working style is, so that you know how to present information to them, including feedback. It's called business chemistry.
Both Carrie and Tanneasha, as you can see from the engagement of our audience today, everything you shared was highly valued, really appreciate it. And this is an important conversation. I'm glad to see you both leading at the tops of your organizations and spreading these philosophies. So thank you again. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sandra to close us out.
Okay, thank you. Another great conversation. I'll keep it short and sweet. We have 6 additional conversations taking place this year. The next one we have on the calendar for June 2nd. So run immediately to the registration link to register. And I did share at the very beginning that we have another program partner here, CCNSF. And Ms. Yvonne, I know I'm placing you on the spot right now. You do not have to come off mute and say absolutely anything, but I do know that we have some grantees here if you wanted to just acknowledge them. Mm-hmm.
Thank you to the CCNSF grantees that have participated in this event this afternoon. It was pleasurable and a most definitely a learning experience. And I'd just like to say thank you for your valued information, your service, and your time. Thank you. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, Angelina, I look forward to doing this again in just a few short days and weeks, and more to come. Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you so much, Tanneasha.